Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Shirley Leung. Today, I'm out in the field. Hi, Anna.
Hey.
Did you find it okay?
Yeah.
I met my producer at Wydette Circle, an industrial no man's land near South Boston. This was supposed to be the location of the fancy new stadium for the 2024 Summer Olympics. Boston was on track to host the games until an organized grassroots movement stopped the bid in 2015. So instead of visiting a shiny new stadium, Anna and I are walking around the same old Wydette Circle.
We're in basically this empty warehouses, parking lot, like a shabby parking lot, surrounded by highways.
And it appears to be some kind of parking lot or layover for 18-wheeler trucks on their way to somewhere. I don't know if they're on their way to the port. Ann and I poked around looking at piles of old train tracks. Wydette is now owned by the state transit system.
It does look like a movie set for some kind of forgotten place.
Yes, or apocalypse.
It's neglected.
But you see the potential. The plan was to build a temporary stadium that the city would use for opening and closing ceremonies. After the Olympics, we would take the stadium down, and then the area could be ripe for development to create Boston's newest neighborhood. Think housing, office, restaurants, even another subway stop.
A totally different vision. Where we're standing right now would have thousands of people.
Thousands of people from around the world, many of them probably seeing Boston for the very first time. When Boston bid for the Olympics, I had this idea that preparing for the games would force the city to confront our biggest challenges. We could finally fix the T, create enough housing. Without hosting the games, we would never get it done. As I like to say, without a deadline, Boston procrastinates.
I think it's fair to say there's nowhere to go but up for Wydette Circle.
That's true.
Okay, let's get out of here.
All right, let's get out. Of course, it's impossible to know what would have happened if we were hosting the games. Sure, it could have been a triumph, but it also could have been a disaster. Boston's ill-fated Olympic bid was one of the wildest news stories I've ever covered. It turns out Boston isn't alone. Many cities around the world have since opposed hosting the games. Jules Boykoff is one person who has been following this trend. He's a professor at Pacific University in Oregon. He specializes in the politics of the Olympics, especially the no campaigns. He was also a professional soccer player when he was young. He watched all the drama play out in Boston and still thinks about what happened here.
I was watching with great interest from where I live here in Portland, Oregon. Anti-Olympics activism is one of my main lines of research. I've been following anti-Olympics activists for some 15 years now. And so when you had this plucky campaign emerge in Boston, it was definitely on my radar. The context was that there were numerous cities at this time that were just saying no to the Olympics. In fact, between 2013 and 2018, around a dozen cities just said no. And it was in that moment that these activists rose up in Boston. So yes, I was paying very close attention to what was happening there.
So what was special about our no campaign here?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that are special. One, it was extremely successful. I mean, it torpedoed a bid where you had some seriously powerful backers involved on the pro-Olympic side. Second, I would say that the composition of the fight back against the Olympics was really interesting. There were two main groups that organized against the games. One of them was kind of working inside the corridors of power, kind of 30-something younger, highly educated people who had good connections to the Democratic Party. So no Boston Olympics, led by people like Chris Dempsey, Kelly Gossett, Liam Kerr. On the other side, you had more of a grassroots activist type of group who were perfectly comfortable hanging out with people from Occupy Boston or in anarchist circles. They were called No Boston 2024. And, Shirley, in my research on activism against the Olympics, I've noticed that inside and outside the power networks groups don't always work so well together, but that's exactly what happened in Boston. You had open lines of communication, you had respect for the other side's tactics, and it really was a group effort to torpedo these games in Boston.
I was around in 2014, and I was writing my column. I actually just launched my column, and I was one of the few voices in the media that was like, I feel like we should keep an open mind here. And I didn't have, and maybe in the beginning I had some people agreeing with me, but by the end of the year or towards the end of the year, a lot of people didn't agree with me. The no campaign had won over a lot of people, but I don't know, part of me still wants to believe that we could have pulled it off.
Well, I think open-mindedness is a very positive quality. Certainly as a researcher, I like to bring that to my research. The fact, though, at the time that this was all happening was some real facts were solidifying coming out of social science circles around the possibilities of hosting the Olympics. And Boston activists did a great job keeping up with the social science evidence that was emerging and then kind of weaponizing it against the bid. And one of the big trends that's unequivocal when it comes to the Olympics is around costs. I call it etch-a-sketch economics, where during the bid phase, bidders promise that the games will only cost so much, but then inevitably the price tag escalates over time. You shake up that etch-a-sketch and put a brand new number, which is inevitably higher. And Boston activists really latched onto this and used it to their advantage. And I have to say, this study that comes out every 2 years from Oxford University chalks up what's going on with each new Olympics in regards to costs and cost overruns. And it turns out the Paris Olympics of 2024 are indeed have an overrun of 115% in real terms, and it could
Wow.
go higher, they've said. And
Wow.
so, weaponizing that social science research was really integral to what these activists managed to do in Boston.
Yeah, I have to say the no campaign was very good at, feeding into Bostonians' fear of cost overruns. I mean, I don't remember if you know, but we had this project called the Big Dig here, and there was billions of cost overruns, and there's a bit of what we call a Big Dig hangover. Still, people are really scared of doing something big, something hard, and something that might cost a lot of money, even though the Big Dig, really transformed the city. I mean, much like maybe the Olympics could have really transformed Boston as well.
Another thing that I noticed was you had a lot of people concerned about civil liberties, and rightly so. I
Mm.
mean, really, if you look at the history of the Olympic Games, basically local and national security forces use the Olympics like their own
Mhm.
private cash machine to get whatever special weapons and laws and funding that would be very difficult to get during normal political times. And a lot of times, the technologies that are brought in to police the Olympics and to keep them safe then just stay on the books and become part of everyday normalized policing afterwards. And so that's why you saw in that moment people like Cade Crockford, the director of technology for the Liberty program at the ACLU of Massachusetts, standing up and really asking big questions about what kind of surveillance procedures would be put in place. And this was all rooted in the previous moment of Boston history, which was the 2004 Republican National Convention, where you saw an
Mhm.
increase in the kind of surveillance and policing that, people like Cade Crockford and the ACLU argued was a foretaste of the policing to come should Boston get the Olympics.
Mhm. I mean, it might have been a decade ago since the Boston lost its Olympic bid, and pulled itself out of the running. Um, but even almost a decade later, people remember one of the big promises of Boston 2024, which was it would finally fix the T. And the T is the nickname for our public
Hmm.
transportation system, the trains, the
Hmm.
buses. And a decade later, the T is still a fiasco. And many people would say it's even worse than it was in a decade ago. And so we don't have the Olympics, right? But we still have this broken T. So couldn't the Olympics fix our T?
Well, it's interesting. If you look at the recent political history of the Olympics, other cities have made kind of similar claims that if you give us the Olympics, it'll allow us a chance to fix up our transportation system. If you look at the examples, it's really mixed. I mean, if you take, for example, Athens 2004, which most people, quite frankly, think is an epic fail of an Olympics in so many ways. But hey, they actually got a decent subway system out of that Olympics in Athens. Then you look at Rio de Janeiro. I was a Fulbright Research Fellow in Rio in 2015, and I was there for the Olympics in 2016 as well. And they actually developed a train line that went from like Copacabana and Ipanema, over to the west side of the city where there would be events. And on one hand, yes, look, you built up this transportation system. In that case, it was very much more geared to the wealthy folks in the western zone of the city that benefited, rather than the working class poor folks in the northern part of the city that very much could have benefited from it. And so, it's not a panacea for fixing a transportation system. And quite frankly, you would hope most cities would be able to do it just on their own without also attaching like a barnacle, this huge sporting event on top of everything. But yeah, when you look at the political history of the Olympics, it's a mixed record. So I don't know. Maybe the T would have got fixed, but on the other hand, it might be even worse.
All right. So the Olympics have been going on for a long, long time. And, they've been these, massive mega events, new stadiums built, new housing, transit systems. I mean, there must have been a few cities that, besides, you mentioned Athens, right? Got a new subway system, but and there's a lot of civic pride when these new infrastructure projects get done. There must be something good that came out of the Olympics, right?
Are there examples here and there where there's been success? Sure, absolutely. So, and is there a feel-good factor involved? No question about it. Like the Olympics are a 17-day party, and I've been able to be there in different cities, whether it was Rio, whether it was London, elsewhere. But the question really is, and I feel like this is what Boston taxpayers, but also Boston activists really raised in an effective way, is do we want to use public energy, public money, the time of our elected officials and their staffs to create a 17-day party for essentially other people, tourists to come in from out of town, journalists to come in from out of town, when maybe we could just spend the money on the things that really matter to Bostonians, such as public health, such as fixing the T, such as all these other things. Do we really need the Olympics as a pretext to do what's right for your city? So yes, there's some positives if you kind of look here and you look there. But overall, unfortunately, in the 21st century, the Olympics have become an inequality machine. They amplify the inequalities that exist in society, and they make them worse by the end of the Olympic Games. And that's just a sad empirical fact. The social scientists have come to that conclusion, and that's the way it is right now, unfortunately.
What would you do differently? Is there a way to make the games better?
Back in 2014, I think it was, I had the good fortune of having the New York Times invite me to write one of those magic wand essays where, if you could fix the Olympics, what would you do? And I approached it in good faith. I was coloring inside the lines the whole time to how to control costs and how to make it actually green instead of engaging in greenwashing and all these things. As I say, very good faith, pretty mild suggestions, which were, by the way, completely ignored by the International Olympic Committee. And they have just plunged ahead. Quite frankly, Olympians, the very people that make the Olympics special, have not been getting their fair share of the money pie. So I would start there. I would actually get rid of the current iteration of the International Olympic Committee, and I would replace it with critical-minded activists who care about justice and fairness in sports, people who have experience in running the Olympics, who haven't been involved in the past, like who could do a big event like this, and give them a chance. I would say imbue democracy in every step of the process. For me, the Olympics should automatically come with democracy in the form of a referendum where everyday people in the prospective Olympic city, even if they can't afford a ticket to attend, will have some say about how their taxpayer money gets spent toward the Olympics or toward these other things that matter in society. So those are just some of the things that I would do to reshape the Olympics in the 21st century. They are an incredibly popular event, so long as they're not happening in your city. Then all of a sudden they start becoming very unpopular as local residents see how the Olympic Games unfold.
More of my conversation with Jules Boykoff after this short break. So, I'm so glad you brought up this idea of making the Olympics more democratic, because I think one of the biggest legacies of the No Olympics campaign in Boston is that it energized a grassroots movement here. It went beyond saying no to the Olympics. I really see the No campaign as an inflection point in the city's politics. It really showed kind of the old way of doing things, kind of ruling by, by a small group of white men. I mean, that doesn't fly anymore. It really paved way to a new democratic way of getting things done in Boston. And I think that's been a good thing. I mean, we didn't get a new stadium, we didn't get a new tee, but we got this incredible new movement, often younger, a younger generation of activists, and kind of the sense that the Davids can beat the Goliaths. I guess in other cities, did that happen? Did the energy from the No campaign, did that transform or move on to other kind of issues in other cities too?
One thing I've noticed about other cities that I've studied in terms of anti-Olympics activism is that the momentum created during the anti-Olympic struggle tends to continue after the event.
Mm.
For years, what happened with anti-Olympics activism, it was sort of like a big game of whack-a-mole. When you go to the county fair and the
Yeah.
thing pops up and you hammer it down when it comes to your city. But then once the Olympics left your city, you'd kind of move on, go back to your regular activism. Well, for starters, there's kind of more of a transnational movement against the Olympics now. And second, even if people do go back to their regular activism, they tend to show up in solidarity for these other groups. What I've seen in places like Vancouver, London, Rio, is that when those activists work together in the context of the Olympics, they become friends. Trust
Mm.
emerges and stays, and then they stay with each other in their struggles afterwards. So, in a weird way, a legacy of the Olympics in many of the Olympic cities has been an enlivened activist culture that continues on in the wake of the Games.
Hmm. Yeah, the one thing I did really like about the idea of hosting the Olympics in 2024, it gave us a deadline. I think
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
problem. Right now we could fix the T. Right now we could build more housing, but there's no deadline.
Mhm.
No one's saying on 2024 you're going to have thousands of people show up. And so you better fix the T. You better have places for them to stay. And so
Mhm.
that's the one thing that's missing.
Yeah.
The Olympics give cities a deadline to do big, important things.
Yeah, there's no question about that. The flip side of that deadline also is that in terms of these construction projects, whether it's the T or the Olympic Village for athletes, if there's that deadline, it's starting to get close to the deadline, you can bet that the construction firms are going to put the squeeze on the taxpayers to get more money. Hey, if you want to get it done before the Olympics, you're going to have to pay a little bit extra. And I've just seen that in city after city. The deadline that you're talking about has positive qualities, but it can also be a driver of costs through the roof.
And one thing we haven't talked about is about when we have all these progressive cities like Boston and others and saying no to hosting the Olympics. I mean, it's the authoritarian governments like China, Russia, maybe even Qatar someday that want to host the games to burnish their reputations. I mean, is that where we're also headed to?
No question about it. That has been the dynamic. As I mentioned to you before, between 2013 and 2018, around a dozen cities said no thank you to the Olympics, either through a referendum, the threat of a referendum, or when somebody was elected to office on a no Olympics platform. And so in that moment, the International Olympic Committee did two things. One, it turned more to China, Russia, these other countries where you don't have to worry about pesky things like referenda. Saudi Arabia is hosting the 2029 Asian Winter Games. You heard me right, the Asian Winter Games.
Really? How are they doing that?
Let's just
Fake
say,
snow.
yeah, let's just say it's not going to be a green event. It's going to take loads of energy to create these indoor snow mountains and so on. It's going to be a total green nightmare. But the point is, Saudi Arabia is lining themselves up. That's how you do it. You show you can do the smaller Olympic-like
Mm.
events and then ingratiate yourself with the International Olympic Committee. They have an eye on a future Olympics. But the fact is, the International Olympic Committee itself has become much more authoritarian under its current president, Thomas Bach, who runs the Olympic machine with an iron fist. And, during that time period when all those cities were saying no to the Olympics, one might have thought the IOC would have slowed down and said, maybe we could change our model to make it more acceptable to these various cities. No, actually, what they did was they stayed the course. They changed their rhetoric a little bit here and there, but they largely stayed the course. And they decided that any city that they could get on the hook whenever, they would just sign that city up for the Olympics. And
Mm.
so Brisbane, for instance, got the Olympics 11 years in advance of them actually happening. How can you have a serious public
Wow.
discussion around a huge thing like the Olympics 11 years in
Mm,
advance? And so the IOC has moved in exactly the opposite
right.
direction.
Okay, so Jules, before becoming a scholar, you were a serious athlete playing professional soccer. So, at what point in your athletic career did it occur to you there was a political side of sports and maybe I should hang up my cleats and go hang out in the library and read a lot of books?
Yeah, it was a slow evolution. I'm a little bit sheepish to say, but one of the great things about being a professional athlete, especially when there wasn't an internet and phones to distract you all the time, is that it was the most intensive reading patch in my entire life. I live in Portland, Oregon. We have one of the world's greatest bookstores in Powell's here, and I would spend a lot of my downtime in Powell's, sipping on coffee and reading books. And so, in that process, I learned a lot. I just started reading like mad in politics, in history. I was reading fiction. I was reading poetry. It was the glory days, I'm telling you.
And so, when did you, decide I'm going to go into academia, and how did you become, an expert on the Olympics?
I was encouraged by some people that I care about and trust to enroll in a PhD program in politics, which is what I did at American University. And so that's kind of pivoted me there. But my research, was on the suppression of political dissent in the United States.
Mm.
And that is the pivot to getting me up to Vancouver, because I just live, just a few hours by train up to Vancouver, Canada. And they were hosting the Olympics. And ahead of that, poet friends and activist friends of mine up there were saying, "Hey, man, you got to get up here because it's a suppression of dissent orama." They were passing special laws there
Mm.
that made it illegal to put signs up outside of your business that were against the Olympics. They were persecuting artists who were putting anti-Olympic signage in the public space. And so I went up there, took the train up there, and I wrote a couple pieces on that. And in doing so, I realized that there's just so much more going on with the Olympic Games. It's this interesting machine of athletic excitement, but at the same time, a machine of inequality and injustice. So I just kind of kept going from there. And I guess, gosh, it's been like 15 years now, and I continue to be surprised by things that I learned. So I'll probably keep going with it.
How does your perspective as a former athlete shape the research that you do on the politics of sports?
Yeah, well, I wish it shaped it more because I'm honestly a little embarrassed at what adult I was when I was playing. When I played in this tournament in France, when I was playing for the under 23 men's national soccer team, and we played against Brazil, what was then Yugoslavia, what was then Czechoslovakia, what was then the Soviet Union, I kind of thought that we were going to get, I thought we were going to get a lot of love from the fans. And guess what? We didn't.
Mhm.
And as this 19-year-old, I was like, what's going on? I thought, the United States, best country in the world, et cetera, is what I've been told since I was a little kid. It didn't seem to be playing out there. And that was a real galvanizer for me. So when I came back from that trip, that's when I started taking politics courses where I was going to college at that
Mm.
time. That's when I turned into a political science major. So I guess you could say that the fans in France really helped me get on the road to understanding this world a little bit better. So I should be grateful to them. I'll thank them this summer when I show up in Paris, every last one of them.
So what will you be doing there? I mean, you don't like the Olympics, but you go to you go to the events anyways.
I don't like the way the Olympics are currently constructed because I feel like they're an injustice factory, but I very much support the athletes who are trying to make their way in this world that's increasingly difficult under the International Olympic Committee's reign. And so I'll be traveling there with my writing friend, Dave Zirin. We've been attending Olympics together for a long time and writing about them for The Nation magazine. And so Dave and I will be on the ground talking about the displacement that's happening in Paris. We'll be talking about the environmental measures that are being put in place there. So we'll be writing about those kind of off the field things. And in the past, we've been lucky enough to have athletes at the Olympics give us tickets. This year, we're going to rugby sevens, which is an amazing sport, super high energy. We're looking forward to that. And because of my soccer background, we're going to be going to soccer as well. So, yeah, we'll be kind of running around, working really hard to try to uncover what's really happening in Paris to everyday people. We'll try to do that and spray it out to the world so we can have a more robust understanding of this Olympic machine.
I hope you have a good time in Paris. I hope you do great research there and keep up the good work. So Jules Boykoff is a researcher at Pacific University. His new book is called What Are the Olympics For? Thanks for joining me on Say More.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate this chance to speak with you, Shirley. Thanks.
Today's episode was produced by Anna Kusmer. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Zuzair Ahmed. Our music is from APM Music. If you like the show, please follow us and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.